My name is Zara. I used to believe I was invisible, not in a dramatic, self-pitying way, just in the quiet, unnoticed sense of existing on the edge of other people's lives. Every morning, I tied my hair into a tight bun, pulled on the plain, black uniform of Rose's diner, and stepped behind the counter like I was part of the wallpaper. I was 26, fluent in 6 languages, and serving eggs and coffee to truckers and night shift workers in a dusty corner of Brooklyn. I didn't hate my life, but it was small, too small for the mind I carried around like a secret. My parents had come from St. Petersburg when I was 10. My father disappeared within a year, just one more immigrant who couldn't bear the weight of failure. My mother, too proud to ask for help, cleaned houses until her lungs gave out. She was back in Russia now, sick and alone, and I was sending her every spare dollar, every single one. I couldn't afford dreams, not when the rent was due and her medicine cost more than my weekly tips. Then came that day, the day I stopped being invisible. It was a Thursday, quiet, rainy, the kind of shift where you can hear the sizzle of every egg on the griddle. I was refilling the salt shakers when my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. Normally I wouldn't have answered, but I recognized the country code. Russia. My heart stopped. "Mama?" I whispered, stepping around the counter and answering in Russian. "Mama, are you okay?" It wasn't her. It was her nurse. Again. Her fever had worsened. They were short on medication. The clinic refused to treat her without more cash. My stomach sank. I looked at my tips. Crumpled singles, coins. Not enough. I argued in rapid Russian, my voice rising, then steadying, switching from desperation to logic, negotiating like I'd done 100 times before. I didn't know that across the room someone was listening, a man in a charcoal coat, sipping black coffee at the corner booth. He looked like any other late-night business traveler, tired eyes, scuffed briefcase, the kind of man who tipped decently, but spoke rarely. I'd seen him once or twice before, always alone. I didn't even know his name. But that day, as I hung up the call and forced myself back into waitress mode, something changed. Because right after that, a customer snapped at me. One of those arrogant types who think their toast being too brown is a personal offense. He cursed. Loudly. I didn't flinch. I just smiled the way I'd learned to. "I'm sorry, sir," I said in perfect, neutral English. "Would you like me to burn the next one less thoroughly?" The man in the booth chuckled softly. I noticed. But I didn't know what it meant. Not until the next morning. I was wiping down the same counter when a man in a tailored suit walked into the diner. He didn't order anything. Instead, he walked straight to me and said, "Zara?" I blinked. "Yes?" He handed me a card. Thick, matte black, with a silver emblem embossed in the corner. Maddox International Holdings. "My name is Tyler. Mr. Grant Maddox would like to speak with you." I stared. "I'm sorry. Who?" "Grant Maddox," he repeated calmly. "He was here yesterday. Corner booth." I froze. "The man in the charcoal coat? He'd like to invite you for a conversation," Tyler continued. "He's waiting on his jet." I laughed. I actually laughed. "His what?" Tyler didn't flinch. "It's parked at Teterboro. We leave in an hour." Half of me thought it was a scam, but the other half, the one that had always felt caged, was already packing her apron into her locker. What if this was real? What if the universe had finally cracked open for a second? I left a note for Rose, grabbed my coat, and followed Tyler into a black SUV. The ride to the private hangar was surreal. The jet was sleek, silver, quiet. I stepped aboard in my worn sneakers and thrift store coat, feeling like a shadow in a palace. And there he was, Grant Maddox. He didn't smile, but he nodded. "Zara, sit." His voice was low, clipped, but not unkind. He didn't waste time. You speak Russian. I nodded. Yes. You handled that angry man well. Also yes, I said cautiously. You speak other languages? 5 more. English, French, Spanish, Arabic, and Mandarin. He blinked, but didn't react with the awe I'd come to expect from people when I told them that. He just said, "Where'd you learn?" "Books, YouTube, my mother. Life." He studied me. "You ever considered doing something else?" I hesitated. "Like what?" He leaned forward. "Like running strategy teams for global expansion." I blinked. What? I build companies. I don't hire resumes. I hire brains. You're sharp, fast. I saw it in 5 minutes. You think clearly under stress, negotiate in 2 languages, and you made a grown man apologize for toast. I was speechless. "This isn't charity," he added. "It's business. I want to test your thinking. One problem. You solve it by the time we land in Chicago. We talk about your future." He slid a thin folder across the table. Challenge accepted. The problem was complex, something about cross-border logistics and a failing negotiation between his company and a Brazilian tech firm. I hadn't studied business, but I understood people, patterns, language, psychology. I read, I mapped, I thought aloud. By the time we landed, I had 3 possible solutions, ranked by risk and predicted outcomes. He read them silently. Then he smiled, for the first time. I didn't find. "You," he said, "you emerged." The moment the jet touched down in Chicago, something in me shifted. I had always lived on the edge of opportunity, but now it was as though the door had opened, and I was stepping into a world I wasn't sure I belonged to. Not yet. I felt like a shadow, floating through a dream, unsure whether I was still the same Zara, the waitress in Brooklyn who lived paycheck to paycheck, or someone entirely different. But the next few hours would solidify everything. Grant Maddox didn't waste time. The moment we disembarked from the plane, we were whisked into a sleek black town car. His assistant, a woman named Jessica, sat in the front, typing furiously on her phone, while I silently watched the world blur by. We arrived at a massive office building, glass walls stretching into the sky like an architectural statement of wealth. It wasn't the building, though, that left me speechless. It was the atmosphere, the steady hum of money, influence, and power that radiated from every corner. I could feel it in my bones, a presence that was both exhilarating and overwhelming. Grant led the way through the lobby, and I followed without question, my heels clicking sharply on the polished floor. We took an elevator to the top floor, the doors opening to reveal a panoramic view of the city. The skyline stretched before us, and for the first time in my life, I realized just how small my world had been. "I built this," Grant said, as though reading my thoughts. "Every inch of it." I tried to imagine the years of struggle it must have taken to rise to the top of such an empire. It was hard to fathom that a man like him, sitting so comfortably in his wealth, had once been where I was, struggling to make ends meet. We entered a sleek boardroom, and I was struck by the contrast. The dark wood table, the modern chairs, the high-tech screens lining the walls. This was not the world of waitressing. This was the world of high-stakes business, where decisions were made in minutes and lives changed forever. Grant took a seat at the head of the table, gesturing for me to sit across from him. "I need someone who can think under pressure," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "Someone who can analyze complex problems in real time and offer solutions." I nodded. The challenge was clear now, but the pressure was mounting. I had no formal education in business, no business suit, no polished resume. But what I did have was experience, real-world experience in navigating the intricacies of language, culture, and human interaction. Grant slid a piece of paper across the table, and I glanced down. It was a problem statement. It was complicated, but not impossible. I had handled worse in my life. In fact, I had dealt with problems that were far more personal than this one. I sat up straight, focused, my mind kicking into high gear. I didn't have the luxury of hesitation. There was no time to second-guess myself. The problem was about expansion. His company was negotiating a deal with a Chinese tech firm, and there was a breakdown in communication. The two companies had different cultural approaches to business, and it was causing friction. Grant wanted me to find a solution. I read the details quickly, my eyes scanning the document with rapid precision. The answer wasn't in the numbers, but in the relationships. It wasn't about finding a middle ground. It was about recognizing the deeper motivations of both sides. I started speaking, my words flowing without hesitation. The Chinese company values long-term relationships over short-term profits, I explained. They don't trust deals that are rushed. It's a matter of face. They don't want to look like they're giving in too quickly. If we can create a sense of mutual respect, not just in business, but in how we approach each other, we can rebuild the trust. Grant listened intently, his expression unreadable. I continued. We need to emphasize respect for their culture, show them that we understand their values. It's not about compromising, it's about creating a partnership that honors both sides equally. And that starts with the language we use. I paused, glancing up at him. I think I can help bridge that gap. He nodded slowly, his fingers tapping the table. I like your approach, he said, but the real test will be if you can convince them. You'll have one shot. I swallowed hard. One shot. That was all I would get. Here's the deal, Grant continued. If you can make this work, I'll offer you a position in my company. A real position, not as an assistant, but as a consultant. You'll be working directly with me. I nodded, the weight of his words settling over me like a mantle I wasn't sure I was ready for. But in that moment, something inside me ignited. This wasn't just an opportunity. This was the moment that could change everything. I had nothing to lose. The next few days were a blur. I was thrown into meetings with executives, translators, and legal teams. I was expected to quickly familiarize myself with the nuances of the deal and create a strategy that would appeal to the Chinese tech firm. It wasn't easy. The pressure was intense, and every decision felt like it could determine my future. But with each challenge, I learned. I absorbed. I began to see the world from a different perspective, one that was shaped by strategy, power, and global influence, and I was good at it. I may not have had the formal training, but I had a sharp mind and a relentless work ethic. I threw myself into the task with everything I had, staying up late, poring over documents, and finding ways to make the deal work. Slowly but surely, I began to gain the trust of the Chinese company. Then, on the day the final contract was signed, Grant called me into his office. He handed me a folder, the final agreement. I had done it. I had saved the deal. You did well, he said, his voice approving. I knew you had potential, but this was something else. I smiled, but the smile was fleeting. I had done the work, but I knew I had only just begun. There was a long road ahead of me, and I was ready for it. And just like that, my life had changed. It hadn't been magic. There had been no sudden wave of fortune, no stroke of luck that landed me in the lap of luxury. What had changed was my mindset. I was no longer the girl in the diner, hoping for something more. I was a player in a bigger game, one that was only just beginning, the private jet, the meetings, the contracts. They were all part of the journey. But the real change came from within. Grant had seen something in me, something that I hadn't even seen in myself. And now I was determined to prove that I was more than just a waitress with a knack for languages. I was Zara, and I was ready to build my own empire. The first few months at Maddox International felt like a whirlwind. Every day was an adventure, an exhausting, exhilarating adventure. I had traded the quiet diner for a high-rise office with glass walls and panoramic views, the kind of place where billion-dollar decisions were made. But with success came pressure. a lot of it. I was no longer just a consultant. I had become an integral part of the company. Grant had taken me under his wing, but he didn't go easy on me. He expected results, and fast. Every project felt like a test, every deal an opportunity to prove myself. At first, I was just excited to be part of something so big. I attended meetings with executives who had years of experience, all of them twice my age, their eyes filled with skepticism. But I didn't care. I had something they didn't, an unrelenting drive, a hunger to prove that I belonged here, that I was more than just some waitress with a good head for business. I worked hard. I stayed late. I learned to navigate the complex world of mergers, acquisitions, and international negotiations. Every success, every small win felt like a victory, a validation of everything I'd worked for. But with success came envy. It was inevitable. The first sign came from Alex Carter, one of the senior executives at Maddox International. He had been with the company for years, a man who'd built his career on cutting deals and closing partnerships. To him, I was an outsider, someone who had jumped into the deep end without the proper training, without the pedigree. At first, Alex played the game. He'd compliment my work, offer advice in a way that seemed supportive, but always came with a hint of condescension. "You're doing well, Zara," he'd say, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But you're not a real businesswoman yet. You haven't seen the hard stuff." I smiled politely, nodding as I always did, but inside, I felt the sting. Alex didn't understand. He didn't understand what it was like to claw your way out of nothing, to fight for every opportunity, to be underestimated by everyone around you. I had been underestimated my whole life. But his criticisms didn't stop. They became more frequent, more direct. And soon I started to notice something else, subtle shifts in the way people spoke to me, in the way they treated me. It wasn't just Alex. It was the entire executive team. One day, during a major presentation to a potential investor, I felt it. The tension in the room, the doubt in their eyes as they looked at me, a 26-year-old woman who had no formal education in business. No Ivy League connections, no silver spoon. I had no business being there, in their eyes. They were wrong. I knew that. But the self-doubt crept in. I had become the outsider in a room full of insiders. I was no longer just Zara the waitress. I was Zara the threat. I could feel the eyes on me, waiting for me to fail. The pressure was mounting, and I was struggling to keep up. I worked harder than ever, trying to prove myself in every meeting, trying to silence the whispers of doubt that echoed in my mind. But there was a tipping point, a moment when I almost broke. It happened during an international pitch in Paris. We were negotiating a joint venture with a major tech company in Europe. The room was filled with executives from both sides, and I was leading the presentation, walking them through our proposed strategy. I had spent weeks preparing, perfecting every detail. And yet, halfway through, I faltered. The tech company's CEO, a sharp woman named Isabel, raised an issue that I hadn't anticipated. A legal loophole. The room went quiet as I scrambled for an answer, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel every eye on me waiting for me to fail. I opened my mouth, but the words didn't come out. For a moment, I thought I would collapse. And then, just as the silence became unbearable, Grant Maddox spoke up. He was sitting at the back of the room watching me, calm, unfazed. "Zara," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "Do you have an answer for that?" I stood there, frozen for a second, unsure. But then something clicked. It wasn't just about answering the question. It was about regaining control, about showing them that I could handle this, no matter how hard it got. I took a deep breath, glanced at the legal documents in front of me, and found the clause Isabel had missed. I didn't just solve the problem, I turned it into an advantage for us. The room relaxed, but the damage had been done. I had saved the deal, but the whispers of doubt hadn't gone away. The pressure was higher than ever, and I couldn't shake the feeling that one mistake, just one, would end everything. Despite the strain, things kept moving forward. I had learned to navigate the shark-infested waters of business, but the weight of constant scrutiny started to take its toll. I became more isolated, retreating into my work and away from the world outside. That's when I met Anna, one of the company's newer recruits. She was young, ambitious, and eager to climb the corporate ladder, just like I had been. We quickly became friends, bonding over our shared experiences of being women in a male-dominated industry. Anna was different, though. She had a fire in her that I recognized, a drive that could either propel her to the top or burn her out. She quickly became a rising star in the company, impressing Grant and the others with her sharp intellect and relentless work ethic. But as Anna's star rose, mine began to fade. I could see it happening. The meetings that I had once led now had Anna at the helm. The deals I had brought in were now being handled by someone else. It wasn't just Alex anymore. It was everyone. I was being replaced, and I didn't know how to stop it. Then came the storm. It was a Friday afternoon when I got the call. My mother had passed away. I felt the world stop. Everything I had been working for, the promotions, the deals, the recognition, suddenly didn't matter. The grief hit me like a wave, drowning everything else in its wake. I took a few days off. I needed to grieve. I needed to be with family. But when I returned, I realized something crucial. I had to find a way to honor my mother's memory. She had given everything for me to have a chance at a better life, and I wasn't going to squander it. The moment I returned to the office, I knew that my work wasn't just about business anymore. It was about something bigger. It was about building something that would outlast me, that would honor her sacrifice. I couldn't let this storm break me. I had faced far worse than this. I wasn't going to let my grief define me. It's funny, looking back, how sometimes it takes a moment of personal loss to realize what truly matters in life. For me, that loss was my mother. I had spent so much of my life trying to escape the limitations of my past, working countless hours, making impossible decisions, navigating a world that was never designed for someone like me, that I had almost forgotten the core of why I started this journey in the first place. When I returned to Maddox International after her passing, I came back with a different mindset. I no longer cared about the accolades or the titles. What I cared about was building something real, something that would leave a legacy, not just for me, but for everyone who had ever been told they weren't good enough. The first task at hand was figuring out where I fit into this new world. I had proven myself in so many ways already, but now I had to make my mark in a way that was undeniably mine. It wasn't enough to sit behind a desk and keep making deals. I needed to take ownership of something larger, something that could change the game. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Grant called me into his office one day, his face unreadable as always. I walked in, taking a seat across from him, still a little nervous despite everything I'd been through. "Zara," he began, "I've been thinking about your future with this company. You've come a long way, and your instincts are sharp. But I need to know, what is it you want to build here?" I could feel the weight of his question pressing down on me. The answer didn't come immediately. I thought back to the early days, when I was just a waitress in Brooklyn, longing for a shot at a better life. I thought about the countless nights I spent working at that diner, about the feeling of endless struggle, the uncertainty of every paycheck. It was that hunger, that need to prove myself, that had driven me. But now I wanted something different. I wanted to create an empire that didn't just belong to one person, but to many people, people like me, who had been overlooked and underestimated, people who had been told they weren't enough. "I want to build a company," I said, my voice steady, "that empowers people from all backgrounds, that gives them a real chance at success. A company that doesn't just make money, but changes lives." I want to be the voice for the underdog. Grant leaned back in his chair, a slight smile curling on his lips. I like that, he said quietly. You've always had a vision. But now, it's time to take it further. That conversation marked a turning point.
Within weeks, I was given the opportunity to lead my own division within the company, an initiative focused on social impact and global partnerships. It wasn't just about making money, it was about building bridges between communities, creating
opportunities for those who had been excluded from the world of high finance and business. At first, it was a tough sell. Some of the old-school executives didn't see the value in this approach. Why spend time on social initiatives, they'd ask. It doesn't move the needle for us. Focus on the numbers. But I knew that the numbers alone wouldn't be enough to sustain long-term growth. What mattered was the impact we could have. It took time, but I eventually convinced the board that the future wasn't just about wealth. It was about influence. And influence came from doing things differently. I started working with underrepresented communities around the world, setting up mentorship programs, investing in small businesses, and providing scholarships to those who didn't have the means to go to college. It wasn't just about charity, it was about empowerment. It was about giving people the tools to succeed, not just a handout. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. As my influence within the company grew, so did the tension. Alex, who had always seen me as a threat, started actively trying to undermine my efforts. He mocked my social initiatives, calling them a distraction and a publicity stunt. He pushed back on every decision I made, questioning my methods and my goals. The more I fought for my vision, the more I realized that not everyone in this world would be on my side. Success was never guaranteed, not for me, not for anyone. But what mattered was how I handled the adversity. The setbacks didn't define me. They made me stronger. One day, after a particularly heated board meeting, I found myself standing on the balcony of the office, looking out over the city. The wind whipped through my hair, and for a moment I felt a sense of peace. I had fought so hard to get here, to prove to myself and to others that I was capable. But I couldn't do it alone. I needed people who believed in what I stood for. As if on cue, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to see Grant standing behind me, his expression softer than usual. "You're doing the right thing, Zara," he said, his voice calm. "People, like Alex, people who can't see the bigger picture, they'll fight you. But they're not the ones who matter. The ones who matter are the people who believe in what you're building. And they're out there." That conversation, simple as it was, changed everything. I realized then that success wasn't about silencing the critics. It was about finding the people who shared your vision, your passion, and your drive, and surrounding yourself with them. That's how empires were built. And that's exactly what I did. In the following years, Maddox International grew in ways I never could have imagined. The company became a leader not just in business, but in social change. We continued to grow our global partnerships, expanding into new markets and industries. But more importantly, we made a lasting impact on communities around the world. I had made my mark, but more importantly, I had built something meaningful, a legacy that would outlive me. And through it all, I never forgot where I came from. The truth is, success doesn't come easily. It doesn't come in one big moment or one lucky break. It comes from the small decisions we make every day, the choices we make when no one is watching. It comes from resilience, from refusing to give up when the world tells you that you don't belong. I was once the waitress in a small diner, struggling to make ends meet. Now, I'm the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, one that isn't just about profit. It's about purpose. It's about making the world a better place for the underdogs. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Success isn't about being the smartest, the most educated, or the most connected. It's about heart. It's about determination. It's about knowing that no matter how hard the road gets, you're willing to keep walking, even when everyone else tells you to stop.